Hey team, welcome back to another great episode of the Intentional Agribusiness Leader Podcast. This is your host, Mark Jewell, and today I'm joined by my friend Brett Bell from Albert Lea Seed. He's the CEO over there, and I think you guys are in for a treat. He's got a great mind, and we're going to pick it. So, Brett, welcome to the show. Thanks for being on, man.
Mark, thanks for having me, and thanks for the kind words.
Absolutely. So, Brett, opening question everybody gets. What does it mean for you to be intentional?
Being an intentional leader for me, Mark, is pretty simply stated having purpose in what you do and being genuine. For instance, I try to make a weekly habit of getting around and seeing our employees, just listening to how they're doing, trying to understand what they're going through, some of the challenges, opportunities. And it's one of those things that can easily get missed, given my role as a CEO. A lot going on. But when you think about leading with intention, that's how I would best define it: having purpose in what you do and being absolutely genuine, and getting out and spending time and listening to your employees.
Beautiful. I love the idea of getting out there face to face, actually spending time rubbing elbows. With the schedule that I imagine that you have to have, we talked offline, 3 kids, family, a business to run, geographically dispersed people, I'm sure, like just about everybody to some extent. How do you make that happen? Like, what does that actually look like in terms of intentionally curating the time to go do that?
In practice, it's how I schedule my week. So I usually sit in 2 different locations. We're based in Albert Lea, Minnesota. I actually live in Ames, Iowa, so it's about a 90-minute commute. I have an office in Albert Lea where I start the week. I have an office here in Ames where I usually end the week. And so it just starts with planning where I'm going to spend my time, which is frankly the most limited resource any of us have is time. So that's how I start it. And then I really get centered on the purpose of my job, and that is many things, one of which is to listen to our employees and our customers, meet them where they're at, and really understand what they're going through with the express purpose of making sure they feel heard, making sure they're engaged, and then helping us go forward as an organization. And when you frame it in that light, not only is it much more enjoyable, but it's actually pretty easy to find the time to invest in spending time with your people.
Yeah. Beautiful. I love it. It's one thing to talk about it. It's another thing to get out there and do it. And part of being intentional is being deliberate, from our definition, at least. So if you have to actually, like, in practice, like you said, to use your words, in practice, you actually have to block the time and make it an intention to go out there and see folks face to face, which is cool. So, Brett, give us a little bit of background on yourself. Tell us about you. Tell us about Albert Lea Seed. How do you get to be the CEO of a regional seed company like that?
Yeah, I'm originally a farm kid from Iowa. I was Iowa State grad in '96, MBA from Purdue, and about 5 years after that, I've really worked throughout the entire Midwest, largely Midwest row crop supply chain. Started with Syngenta right out of Iowa State for 5 years as a district sales manager in Northwest Iowa, which is interesting. I started my career selling seed as a territory rep. And then I went into consulting. From there, I went to work for a retailer in Northwest Iowa, ended up with Cargill in their worldwide headquarters for about 10 years, looking after their Midwest ag inputs business, which is about 7 states in the center of the country. And then Cargill sold that part of the business, and I had to go. Rotated back to Iowa as the COO for Landis Cooperative. Landis had just been formed. It was the merger of West Central and FC, and they wanted someone to come in from the outside. I was not a cooperative individual from that standpoint. I never really spent time in the cooperative system per se, and so they wanted someone to come in and help organize, drive performance in their, particularly their crop inputs business. Spent about 3.5 years doing that, and then I went into the startup world. Thought it'd be interesting to try a startup gig. Went to work for a company called Nuvia Plant Nutrients, based in Florida. I was on their leadership team and had the chance to lead their sales force. So I essentially built, and this kind of plays to your strengths, essentially built a brand new sales team, and then in doing so, had to teach them how to sell, leverage resources much like your organization to really show that employee how to sell and connect with customers and create value. And then unfortunately, we ran out of runway.
Yep.
And that gave me the opportunity to just sit back and reflect. That was in 2023.
Yeah.
And my oldest had just graduated from high school. In fact, the day after his grad party was the day we decided to discontinue operations. So I
Oh,
took
wow.
3 months to figure out what I wanted to do.
Hmm.
And fortunately, after 25, 26 years in the industry, kind of moving around, working for various organizations, I had the benefit of a network to fall
Hmm.
back on. And I discovered through that network that Albert Lea Seed, which is a 102-year-old, third generation,
Wow.
family owned business, was for the first time looking to bring in an outside CEO.
Wow.
And so I discovered this through a contact, and I was introduced to Mac, who's now
Yep.
my boss. He was the president at the time. We took a couple months to get to know each other. The fit was great. And so I joined the team in August of 23, and here I am.
Yeah. Wow. That's awesome. Great backstory, by the way. Thanks for the detail on it. One of the things I've liked about in our conversations that we've had over the last year or so is just the level of depth of thought and just the idea of being, taking that 3 months to kind of figure out, hey, where do we go next? Actually being intentional with where we go. Not everybody's always in a position to be able to take the time when that happens. But I love the idea of being able to actually just pause, especially being probably at that stage, career wise, right? 20 some years into it. And, you know, I think we all cross that threshold at about 20 years where it's like, okay, what's this really about? Where are we going next? So very good.
Exactly. And it really forces the opportunity um, to do that. And I was fortunate enough to have the ability to take that time.
Yeah.
And it was like, as I mentioned, my oldest is graduating from high school. He's a baseball player. So I had the chance to really lean into his senior year baseball season. And I was the
Hmm.
dad that was there first,
Yep.
almost every single game I rarely missed. And that really gave me an opportunity to enjoy his last year of
Yeah.
high
That's
school
cool.
while I was trying to find the next step.
Yep. Yep. That's awesome. Amazing. I think most would miss this, but I wanna spend a little bit of time here before we get into the other stuff. You're one of a few people that I know who are the first CEO in a family, a legacy business, maybe that's been around for 40, 50, 100 years. We've got a couple clients actually that are in that arena. What is it like, coming in, like just culturally speaking? That I think the benefit for the listeners, Brett, is a lot of you are working in farms where you have maybe the next generation leader
Hmm.
taking over from the father or grandfather. That's pretty common these days. They may be even involving some outside help, right? In some of these larger farming operations, I imagine a fair number of our people that listen to this are running into those situations. Maybe you work for a company that's multi generational and adding. And I'm specifically thinking of a couple who I know listen to the show on a regular that work in these multi generational. Now it's the millennial generation has taken over from the boomers. In some of these, I mean, $1 billion plus operations, and it's a lot. It's a big load to carry. So I'd qualify my question a little bit. Like, what's it like taking over? Like, what advice would you lend from your perspective and what you've learned in the last couple of years to those who are maybe walking through similar situations?
Yeah. So the first thing we did, we meaning myself and Mac, who's now my boss, the board chairman, he was president at the time. We spent a lot of time figuring out what good looks like in this role.
Mm,
What are the goals of the organization, and where do I want to go with my career, and are they aligned? Through the interview process, one of the questions that stuck with me the most is he basically said, for this to go really bad, what would have to be true? Which I
mm,
thought was an incredible question. And I reflected on it. I said, Mac, I think the biggest um, concern for both of us is misaligned goals and expectations after we make a decision. I've
mm,
got other opportunities to go do other things that I would have to forego. You will have other opportunities to hire the first outside CEO. And so the stakes, I think, are pretty high for both of us. So let's spend time figuring out, where do you want to go organizationally? And am I
mm,
the right person to help you get there?
Mm-hmm.
So that's where we started, and clearly that was successful because here I am. And then once I got into the organization, I really took time to understand. We're going to talk about culture a little bit later, but for me, culture is how you do work. I think you
Mm-hmm.
really have to define culture for people so they understand what you're talking about, and then you can use
Mm-hmm.
examples of how we do safety or how we hire people or how we train. Culture is how you do work, and so I spent really 90 days trying to understand the culture of the organization, how they do work, why are people with Albert Lea, how long they've been here. I sat down with probably half of the team
Mm-hmm.
individually for an hour just to get to know them. And two questions I had is one, why are you working here? And
Yeah.
two, what can we do better? And
Mm-hmm.
invariably, what I heard was it's a family feel, and I believe in the mission. And so I took a lot of time to really understand the culture of the organization, why people work there, and then the other thing that was very apparent going in the mission was not one like I've had in other jobs where it was a bit of a burning platform. You got to come in and you got to maybe break a little china and really get to work quick. Didn't have that pressure. I could
Mm-hmm.
really get to know the organization, get to know the team, and then in doing so, help them get to the next level. When you think about a third generation business becoming a fourth generation, the fourth generation actually reports to me, and I
Yeah.
report to the third generation. So I'm in the middle.
Yeah.
And so 3% of businesses go from the third generation to the fourth. And so
Right.
I joke with
Yeah.
Mac and others at times that I wake up every day and I try really hard not to screw it up because
A
lots of
little bit of
businesses have
pressure.
not, yeah, lots of businesses have not
Yeah.
gotten this far. And so, I mean, that's how I handle it is just try to
Yeah.
get to know the culture, get to know the people,
Mhm.
and then just really respect the legacy, why we do things, and then really try hard to help the organization get to where they need to go.
Nice. Yeah, I really like that. When I don't know if most people, if you're not in the entrepreneurial world, maybe you wouldn't know these numbers or pay attention to them, right? But the numbers are pretty, they play out, right? When you think of a business that gets started today, the likelihood that it's around by 2035, 10 years from now, which is weird to say that. But let's say in 2035, I mean, the likelihood is about what, 8%, right? 8%
Hmm.
are going to last that long. Okay. And the bulk of those are going to be on 60% within the first 5 years.
Yeah,
A lot of them aren't going to make it out of year one.
that's right.
So um, it's so you're saying, let's just say it's, generously 8% are going to be around 10 years from now. Now 3% of those will get passed on to the third generation,
That's correct. It's not
right?
3% of the total, it's 3%
Right.
of those that make it to
Yeah.
3 years will
Yeah.
go to, or third generation will go to the fourth generation.
Yeah, yeah. So it's incredibly small and special, right? I mean, it's an incredibly
Right.
small number, but also like a really special experience to be walking through. And it's almost like you've got a, I mean, antique is a terrible term, but it's like I have this really special inheritance. Let's call it an inheritance that I get to sort of steward.
Great way to think about it, Mark.
Yeah,
Yes, stewarding it. And I'm not here forever. I mean, I've got a
yeah,
somewhat of a predefined runway, and one of my stated goals from the board is find my replacement,
hmm,
which is more than likely going to be someone that's already in the mix, and I just need to help
yeah,
them step
yeah.
into this role over time.
Sure, yeah. Beautiful. Good stuff, man. You brought it up. Let's go to the culture question. I would love to talk a little bit about this.
Yeah.
A lot of people give it lip service. They talk about it. I say that on the show a lot. I find very few companies are really very intentional about curating the culture that they want. There's a lot of reactive cultures out there. So, what in your mind goes into creating an intentional one?
Yeah, so again, I'll go back to what I stated first. You got to
Mhm.
define what culture means because it is a buzzword, and I think it's how people do work, how companies do work, and you got to start there. The other thing that's important is whether or not you're working on your culture, you have one. And
True.
so, I mean, I could think of an organization I work for that we just don't have time to work on that culture stuff.
Hmm.
Well, we had a culture. It was just one that lacked the influence and the intentional. direction that's required to build the right kind of culture. So you got one whether or
Mm-hmm.
not you work on it, and it's how you do work. That's what I continue to remind my team of. The other thing we try hard to do is connect core values to the
Mm-hmm.
culture. So if culture is how you do work, core values are strongly held beliefs
Yeah,
that inform how you do things,
you
which
bet.
again becomes your culture. And so I was with the organization just at a year, and we pulled the entire company together and we talked through these things,
Mm-hmm.
talked through culture, talked through core values, and actually had a really, for me, it was a very enjoyable event where we actually unpacked those elements of our culture that are healthy,
Mm-hmm.
those elements of our culture that are unhealthy, and we all have them. So let's
Mm-hmm.
call
Of
them out.
course. Yeah.
And then there's elements of the culture that frankly have to evolve.
Yeah.
So again, 102-year-old business, but the headcount's doubled in the last 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And Albert Lea Seed was went through an acquisition in 2022. And so the business is growing. And so invariably, there's cultural things that have to change. For instance, for us, one of the biggest cultural items that we had to evolve is you call us and a human being picks up the phone every single time.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been doing that for 102 years. And that was something that the leadership team was very intentional about. Well, the reality of it is we're getting so many calls. We just can't physically pick them all up. And so now we've gently introduced
Mm-hmm.
technology to try to route it. Now
Yeah.
you call us and you still hear Mac Earhart, the president.
Yep.
Thanks for calling. This is Mac. And then he tries to direct you. But that was our culture. Our culture was you call us and a human being answers the phone. So the
Sure.
culture had to evolve, and now we're
Mm-hmm.
using technology. It also impacts the way you hire people. Um, it impacts the way we think about safety. And so if there's a cultural element that is really critical, i.e.,
Yeah.
how we hire or who we hire, that's one that I try really hard to not only get involved in personally, but make sure the leadership team is involved because that's a maybe the single biggest way to impact culture
Mm-hmm.
is who you hire.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. I really like. I love your description of it. It's everybody should go back, rewind here about 4 minutes, and just kind of re-listen to this conversation around culture, specifically around deciding on what your culture is. And I'm just going to say, maybe you're listening to this and you're like, well, I'm not the leader, I'm not the CEO. Uh, that's fine. But could you, if your boss walked into the room today and asked you, like, hey, could you define the culture here? Could you tell me about the culture here? What would you say? I would just maybe spend 5 minutes thinking about that, write your thoughts down, and then in your next one on one with your supervisor, have a conversation. Say, hey, am I on point? Like, is this accurate? Because that actually informs your leadership whether or not they're on point. So if you think you can't have a say or can't have influence, give them some, like, be open and honest, and don't feel like you don't, because maybe you don't know, you'll stand out. Like, that's really good feedback for leadership to,
It is.
to understand what people are thinking, but what is it? And then, can you name a core value in your organization that the organization has that
Mm-hmm.
that actually, helps solidify or epitomizes what the culture of the place is.
Yeah.
Within, like, we're what we call a kingdom culture. So God first in every decision. That's important at the Momentum Company. You'll see us pray at the beginning of our team meetings. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's an important thing for us. And so stewardship is one of the core values that backs that up,
Nice.
right? And so stewardship is a core value. But it's a lens through which, like, when we make decisions, as we think, like, hey, when we're putting together a custom project, is this stewarding our client's culture to the next level, to wherever they want it to go, right? Or not? Or are we just doing it to get paid, right? And only one of those is the right answer.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And I would like to hear more about how you start your meetings after the podcast. One
Yep.
of our core values, probably our top one, is we build goodwill. And
Mm-hmm.
so I shared with you before we started the tape, we just went through an ERP change in
Mm-hmm.
November, and unfortunately, And I think invariably when you do these things, you can fray some goodwill with your customer as the corporation goes through that productivity dip that is inevitable with the change like this. So we're coming out of the spring season and we're reflecting, and part of our culture is continuous improvement.
Yep.
And we're really challenging ourselves. Where have we frayed goodwill? And that's a term I've used with my team in
Hmm.
January as we were rolling into the new year. In a sense, just letting them know that we're undoubtedly going to fray some goodwill,
Yep.
but listen, own it, learn, and we'll continue to iterate and get better. But we got to keep that core value at the forefront of how we work with customers.
Yep. 100%. 100%. Just talk to me a little bit about, because I think there's a nice transition here into attraction and retention of good people at the same time.
Yeah.
So obviously culture should hopefully help us attract the kind of people that we do want, because we know who we are, we know what we stand for, we know what we're about. But, talk to me a little bit about retention, and attraction of good talent in the seed space these days. Like what do you have to share with us on that?
Yeah. So retention, there's a lot of the what I would consider table stakes investing in your people and in training,
Mm-hmm.
much like we were talking about
Yep.
earlier. The Fortunately, the culture here when I joined, and I deserve zero credit for this, but my job going forward is to help preserve it. Is the family feel here is really strong. And back to
Mm.
the interviews or the one-on-ones I had with half our employees when I started, and those two questions: why are you here? The number one thing I heard was it feels like a family.
Hmm.
And so we got a lot going for us. So part of my job is to make sure we continue to foster that, and then of course invest in our people. The other thing that I'm really trying to instill in my leaders as it pertains to retention, it's and we've talked about it already. Spend time with your people
Hmm.
on a regular basis, half an hour a week. You
Yep.
don't have to have a 10-point agenda. Just go in, ask them how their week's going. What are you working on? Where can I help? And
Yeah.
just listen, and then
Yep.
learn from that and continue to build. The number one reason why people leave their job is they don't like their boss. And so
Yeah. Yeah.
spend time with your people
Yeah.
and just hear what they have to say. And then in terms of our performance reviews, that process, one of the things we've actually built in just this last cycle in November, December,
Hmm.
we actually asked that question:
Hmm.
are you planning to work here another 5 years? If so, why is that? If not, why not? To the extent they'll
Hmm.
share. Now, the answer to that question, I think, is heavily predicated on have you been spending regular time with your direct reports? And if
Sure.
you have, hopefully we can have the kind of conversation. So it's more of a trying to recruit them to stay,
Mm.
and
Yeah.
a stay interview of sorts
Hmm.
nested within the performance review. And then we just continue to build on that. But that's how we're trying to retain people.
Yep.
Mark and I just mentioned we went through an ERP change in November.
Hmm.
I'm really excited to report we have not lost anybody through
Wow.
that. And
Yeah.
I tell you, there was moments where I had my doubts, because when
Right.
you push that much change on an organization,
Yeah. Yeah.
sometimes you don't hang on to everybody.
Yep. Yeah. That can. I mean, change is one of those things that sometimes disrupts the flow. Or disrupts that someone's ability to even want to stay. So, congrats on making it through the tumultuous time of implementing a lot of software and making people probably do things in ways that they're not used to. That can be tough.
Thank you.
I know we're kind of coming in here on our time. We talked a lot off the mic, but to give you a little bit real quick, biggest let's say the biggest win, and followed by the biggest challenge career wise.
Yeah, biggest win, I think, Mark, simply stated, is earning the opportunity to do the job I'm doing now as
Mm-hmm.
president and CEO of Albert Lea, again, 102-year-old company. You mentioned that legacy and preserving that. I take that very, very seriously, and I'm very grateful to be here.
Yeah.
So I would consider that the biggest win for me.
Nice.
The biggest challenge, I'll take you back to my days working in the cooperative system.
Mm-hmm.
We had, and this was in 2018, we had two elevator explosions over the
Mm.
span of 9 days.
Oh wow.
One of which led to an employee getting life flighted to the hospital.
Mm.
And so when you think about leading 600 people as one of the top individuals in the company and the head of operations,
Yeah.
and the concern and the fear that people felt in that moment after having two, unfortunate scenarios, that without a doubt was my biggest leadership challenge thus far.
Hmm.
And it's pretty straightforward how I tried to deal with that as a leader. Owned it, tried to
Yep.
dig in, understand why, tried to be as transparent as possible and get out and spend time with people. I mean, if
Hmm.
there's no better way to calm nerves than to get out there and get up
Yeah.
next to your employees and shoulder to shoulder and work through some
Yep.
of these issues. Some of the best leadership experiences or lessons I've learned came out of that hardship. They
Hmm.
don't teach you that stuff in business school.
Right. Yeah.
You just got to figure it out in the moment and hope
Yeah.
you're up to the challenge.
You bet. Yeah. Great examples. Thanks for sharing that. Books or podcasts that you like and that you would recommend.
Yeah, as far as the book, it's funny. This is why I want to talk a little bit afterwards. For me right now, it's the
Yeah.
Bible. That's the
Yeah.
one
Great. Love
I
it.
find the most helpful for me as a leader, as a father, as a husband,
Hmm.
and not only getting into the Bible, but doing it with the right group of guys that might be going through a similar stage in life, that have leadership roles. That I'm in a Bible study right now, and I'm probably the least talented guy in the group, and that does wonders for your ability to be a good leader. Hanging
Yeah.
out with individuals like that and
You bet.
talking through
Yeah.
scripture. As far as podcasts, um, Joe Mosier's got a good one, Pace It Pod.
Hmm.
That's one that I think is on point right now. Business of Agriculture, Damian
Hmm.
Mason. I think he's
Yep.
got a really interesting way of
Yeah.
looking at things. Those are
Yeah. We're
two.
gonna have Damien on soon.
Yeah,
Actually.
those are two I like to tune into on a regular basis from a
Hmm.
podcast standpoint.
Good. Love it. Love it. Yeah. Jamie and I ran into each other at FarmCon and sort of mutually agreed to do each other's shows. So we're gonna we did an interview there at FarmCon for his show, but there was too much background noise, so we had to cut it. It sounds like so. We'll do it. We're gonna bring him over here and see if we get something going the other way. But
Yeah, he's
love
an
it.
interesting.
Yeah, great recommendations. Cool. Well, I know we're coming up on our time here, but any last thoughts or anything you saw in my list of questions that you want to say? Hey, I want to make sure I cover this before we jump.
Yeah, I think um, let's go to the last question. It's
Hmm.
probably the one I grappled with the most, Mark,
Yeah,
and
the
that is how important is
vulnerability.
vulnerability in creating? And
Yeah,
my first reaction is I don't know.
yeah.
And then as I reflected on that, walked away and came back, I think vulnerability clearly belongs in leadership.
Hmm.
But I
Of
think
course.
personally, I think it needs to be within the proper context.
Yes.
So vulnerability for vulnerability's sake for a leader, I think isn't necessarily the right recipe. But if it's
Hmm.
within the proper context, for instance, owning mistakes. Yeah, I was wrong. I
Yes.
screwed up. And so owning your mistakes or your omissions, I think is the right kind of vulnerability as a leader. The other one I like is, asking for help. I mean,
Mm.
oftentimes when you're the CEO, everybody expects you to have all the answers.
Right.
And and that's just not reality. And so
Yeah. Yeah.
whether it's a peer or it's one of your direct reports or it's someone 2 layers, 3 layers below you, hey, I need some help with this. Can
Hmm.
you give me a little guidance, coach me up? And
Yeah.
I particularly enjoy doing that, partly because it's fun to see the reaction on people's face when
Yeah.
you ask them.
Yeah.
But if you can get them over that initial, why is he asking me this question? Usually what comes next is pretty good. And I think
Yeah.
that's another place where showing a little vulnerability is healthy as a
Beautiful.
leader.
Yeah, so good. Great answer to that, by the way. I mean, I think sometimes we get caught up in this idea of vulnerability, especially in the world that we live in today, where it's everybody needs to be full open kimono on
Yeah.
everything, and it's like, and it's not true. But what as you're describing it, going to somebody who's a layer or two down in the organization, or even entry level, and saying like, hey, you're 23, 24, and you probably know more about AI and what we can do and how that can help our business. Could you give me a report? Right? Could you put together something and come train me on that? I mean, that earns you goodwill. That makes you real. I mean, I'm 44. I'm not picking that stuff up. I had a conversation yesterday with a 25-year-old who warped my mind on what is possible in ways to ethically use AI to grow our business. And it was wow, right? I don't. I mean, I've been looking at AI for a long time now. I don't, and I didn't like my brain at mid 40s is not working the
Yeah.
same way that his is at 25. He can probably come in and I can pay him for a half a day to implement those systems into my business, and it will save me having to have two people, kind of thing, right? I mean, that was
Yeah.
like amazing. So
The neuroplasticity of those folks
yeah,
is remarkable.
yeah, but being willing to say, I don't know. I mean, can you help me out? I
Yeah.
love your approach on doing that. Like that was something I did yesterday with this kid, and just like, um, it, it really up leveled my thinking. I'll say that. So,
That's great. Good for you.
there's tons of that, but the point is, there's tons of that walking around each one of our organizations all the time
That's right.
about different things, and we need to be open to looking at that. So, Brett, this has been great. We may have to do another one down the road if you're open to it. It's been a lot of fun, and thanks for being on the show.
Mark, thanks for having me.